Hey there, party people! Way too many of you are interested in my opinions on the Fate Grand Order manga. I mean, it's very flattering, but I was trying to avoid reading most of them. But as I don't want to purposefully disappoint, here I am reviewing some. Since none of them are complete as far as I'm aware, I figure it would be best to cover them by story arc. And where better to start than with Singularity F. Though, for some godforsaken reason, there are two separate manga that cover the events of the first story arc of Fate Grand Order. First is Mortalis Stella, which came out in July of 2017 and is done by mangaka Shiramine. The second is Turas Réalta, which came out a month later in August of 2017 and is done by the mangaka Takeshi Kawaguchi. Now, the fun part that both answers the question posed in the thumbnail and drives me insane. While both manga cover the events of Singularity F and Orleans, they alternate singularities after that. Mortalis taking the even-numbered ones and Turas taking the odd-numbered ones. If I had to make an educated guess, this was done to make sure that all of the singularities could get manga adaptations within our lifetimes. Though, while Turas is deep within Babylonia and thus its final arc, Mortalis isn't done with Septum yet. I do not give any judgment on this. I don't know Shiramine's life, and she should work at the pace that is best for her. I am simply just stating the fact of the matter. But that aside, we are talking about Singularity F. And since both of them do adapt the story, like I said, you can expect some comparing and contrasting here. First, let's start off with something that both versions do. Use the male Ritsuka Fujimaru, which is the main reason I was not at all interested in reading these manga. I am just personally so very against the idea of Gadao being the default Ritsuka at this point. He has these two manga, he has Shinjuku, he has Seraph, he has Agartha, and he has every serious anime adaptation. Meanwhile, the female Ritsuka gets Shimosha, Salem, and Carnival Phantasm. I'm not counting Learning with Manga, that is a separate entity. It's like saying that the mini Nobu are actually Nobu. Overall, I think it should be evenly divided. I would not have a problem with that. But, as it is, my interest takes an absolute nosedive when the generic insert protagonist doesn't even give me the hope of girl boss moments or Yuri. Shimosha and Salem truly carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. Though I do have my own reasons why I'm very much annoyed about Shimosha, but that will be for a future video. Anyway, my griping aside, for all of your sakes, I powered through reading Mortalis Stella first, and honestly, it's probably too faithful of an adaptation. There are beats that are different, like Ritsuka receiving the Mage Mystic code, but there wasn't enough to really sink my teeth into. Like, honestly, just read the story in the game or watch the anime. Nothing is so substantially different from the three versions where it really matters which you go with. It's a very competent storytelling and adaptation, but as it is the third time I've experienced this story with no meaningful deviations outside of the format, it just didn't really do it for me. Being too faithful in adapting can be a hindrance at times, especially when the original story of Singularity F is already really dry, being a glorified tutorial and a place to dump exposition so that you can understand the rest of the story going forward. The one thing that was noticeably different that I really liked was the interpretation of Galahad giving Mosh his powers, and we follow her perspective in swooping in to save Ritsuka in the Singularity. But that's as much as I can really say for it. It should have added just a little more spice, give it its own unique flavor to stand out against the other versions of Singularity F. And that's where Turas Réalta comes in. I was originally not planning to read this one, as there is no official English release for some odd reason, more on that in a second. But since I have so little to say about mortalis stella, and I shamelessly need to reach 8 minutes, here we are. Speaking of shamelessness, please subscribe for more Fate content and consider becoming a channel member. Now, for turas réalta, as I said, there is no official English release. Normally, this is not an issue, but this is an exception. The only version of the first chapter that I could find is very poorly translated and borderline impossible to read, which is downright insane to me. What makes it worse is that subsequent chapters are well translated, or at the very least, completely readable. This begs the question, why is the only readily available version of Chapter 1 so completely terrible? I respect fan translators and what they do, but there has to be some baseline standards. Anyway, moving past that, turas réalta stands out by itself immediately, regardless of translation, as very much being a shonen manga and adding its own flair of irreverent humor and a dash of perviness. Examples being, in this version, Ritsuko was kidnapped at a blood drive, gets a semi-off-screen panty shot of Mosh, and walks in on Romani dropping trow for some reason. This can be hit or miss, and is very understandable why people wouldn't like this, but I do appreciate it because it does make it feel different, even if it's stupid. It's a fresh coat of paint. It's something that I can talk about in a more meaningful way. Overall, I honestly don't mind it. The slapsticky nature and lighter tone doesn't feel too terribly off to me, and would probably be more fun if I could read it properly. I don't like how it sometimes feels immature, namely the Dr. Roman Pants thing, but it's also just hard to judge based on the dialogue, and overall it's small enough to look past. Outside of that, it does follow the story. Ritsuko shows up, gets kicked out of a meeting, bombs go off, and he comforts Mosh in what is surely to be their final moments, until it's not. Now, in the subsequent chapters, like I said, they are readable, so I am able to follow along better. And Chapter 2 immediately shows that this is its own take on Singularity F, as it shows Ritsuko being chased down by a Hassan, turning into a homage of Ku hunting down Shiro, ending with an iconic recreation as Mosh saves him. Also, just want to say, I love this panel. I am overall happy with male Ritsuko in this story, to be honest, mostly because he does feel a bit more like a character, which the other two adaptations of this story struggle to do. This dude squares up. But still, there is a mass amount of expository dialogue, which is unfortunate, but unavoidable because this is Singularity F. Be that as it may, though, the very idea of subjecting readers to this 4 times across mediums is just sadistic. There's no other word for it. A sadist made this decision. Just because you put unnecessary perv shots doesn't make it better. I think it actually makes me angrier, and I love perv shots. Though, speaking of, there is a wasted Boudica altar design that exists only for a single panel. Granted, I do prefer my version of Boudica altar, but I'm just surprised that I don't see more fan art of this. Other than that, the story goes on as normal, very little changes, with some story beats shuffling. Although, I will say that this manga does have the best version of Olga's death, and it's not even close. First, Ritsuko actually thanks her for her help in the Singularity, thus being the first person to acknowledge her. Then, when she's being floated into Chaldeus, Mosh and Ritsuko aren't just standing there. Like, in the anime, at least Ritsuko makes an attempt, but then he doesn't even struggle against Mosh. Neither of them does jack shit in Mortalis, but here, they are both reaching out to her, trying to save her, though of course Lev thwarts it. It just makes it so much more harrowing, so much more visceral, while other versions are just kind of infuriating. So, overall, with all of this in mind, comparing the two manga, I do prefer Toras's version of Singularity F much more. The shonen feeling to it, with the sprinkling of unnecessary perviness, is the most meh thing about it, but it's not overly egregious. Overall, it just feels more enjoyable to read, just less dry. But will that remain true when I cover Orleans? Because I do know that Mortalis does actually shake some things up there. So, perhaps that will be more enjoyable. Guess we'll just have to figure that out when we get there. But for Singularity F, which version do you like the most? Let me know down in the comments below. I am very interested to find out. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope to catch you next time in the void. Later.